everyone. Welcome to the Double Blind Magic Hour, where we cover what's going on in the world of psychedelics. From insider baseball drama within the rapidly unfolding psychedelic movement to the latest news on research, politics, and beyond. I'm Shelby Hartman, Double Blind's co-founder and editor-in-chief, and today we're joined by Dr. Ido Cohen, a clinical psychologist, educator, and psychedelic integration facilitator. We're also very, very lucky to have Ido on the Double Blind team as a resident facilitator, where along with Deanna Rogers, he leads sessions where the double blind community processes their psychedelic experiences together. Hi, Ido.
Hi, Shelby. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited for this, and congratulations on this new child, double blind child.
I don't want to gush too much. I don't even think I've said these things to you directly before. But one of the reasons why we keep inviting you back again and again and again to do workshops and to do this podcast and to facilitate circles is because of just the care and nuance with which you speak about psychedelics. And you strike me as someone who, again, not that any of us have it all figured out, but you strike me as someone who just really practices what you preach. I want to invite you to share a little bit about your own journey and how you got to be this person that I perceive to be incredibly wise.
Well, first of all, thank you. I try to embody my talk, not just talk my talk or walk my walk, or walk the talk, but embody my talk. How I got here is a great question. I come from a lineage of people who help people. My family was in the medical world, and I just grew up with having unusual experiences in my household of people wandering in and out, coming to ask for help, to say thank you for help they received, hearing stories about a lot of healing stories, actually, seeing a lot of healing like tears. So really just, I think I was very exposed to the world, the fragility of humanity and the healing of humanity since I was pretty much a baby. I always tell this story. I think it was legal back then, but when I was growing up and my parents were both working a lot, and there were a few times where we didn't have a babysitter because they couldn't afford it. So we would just hang out in operating rooms and we would watch operations and see the doctors and see behind the scenes. And so I think that was a big influence on me. And I was very clear that I don't want to go that path because I was really thinking, how can I make a difference on people's lives that's long lasting? So not just fix their body, but something that goes a little deeper. And at first I thought I wanted to be a plastic surgeon. I was like, well, you fix this and then they're happy. And then I realized that it doesn't work that way. And
It doesn't?
Well, sometimes, rarely. It makes a difference. But then it was, when I was a teenager, I just realized no, I'm going to be a therapist. And that just paved the way for me. And in my undergrad, I traveled around the world after the army and had a lot of exposure to spiritual practices. And that made me realize that what I want to study is something that blends both, that really brings together the entirety of what it means to be a human on a somatic, emotional, psychological, spiritual level, and how we bring them both and all those dimensions together. And I found my way from Israel to CIIS, which is in San Francisco, California Institute of Integral Studies, because they teach integral psychology. And for me, that was just it was like finding the thing I've been searching for. And when I found it, I also found the plants, or more accurately, they found me. And that was my way into, I had maybe a handful of I had a lot of spiritual experiences, but not a lot of psychedelic experiences by then. And then I entered the world of Central American shamanism. And then everything really, really started changing. And when it was time for me to do my research, it was very clear to me that I want to bridge the world of the plants, the world of psychospirituality, and the worlds of change. And so it was looking at, and I researched the integration process of ayahuasca ceremonies in people who came down to Peru to do retreats. So how did they move from having anything from ecstatic to terrifying? And how do they move from that to long-lasting change through an ongoing process? And that birthed a whole bunch of connections to incredible people and my own projects, and then meeting you and Double Blind. And, as the plants do, here we are now. After all those connections and all those windy roads and paths.
Yeah, one of the things I'm most excited to talk to you about is this sort of entanglement of your work in a more shamanistic context, and also your background as a clinical psychologist, because, you recently were a panelist for a double-blind summit that we did, where there was a pretty heated conversation that unfolded between someone who's practicing in more of a spiritual ceremonial container and someone who has gone the more kind of Western medical approach. And I love that you sort of sit at the intersection of all of these things and you try to find a way forward that can encompass and embody all of them. So I'm looking forward to getting into all of that. But first, we're going to take a quick break. So for those of you who don't know, Double Blind began as a print magazine, and it's still at the heart of what we do. I spent my whole career as a journalist before starting Double Blind, reporting on psychedelics, cannabis, and drug policy more broadly for Rolling Stone, Vice, LA Weekly, Quartz. I did just about everything in journalism. I worked at CBS News covering breaking news, a major newspaper, small media startups, and if you haven't heard, journalism is in crisis. But we started Double Blind anyway because we believe in the value of good journalism to educate and hold stakeholders accountable. We saw what happened in cannabis. Pioneers who put their lives on the line to get patients access to the medicine they needed, getting left behind because they didn't have the capital to compete in the newly regulated market. We've seen what's happened in mental health care and healthcare more broadly, whereby millions of people are suffering, don't trust their doctors, can't afford proper care, and just don't know what to do to get well. In our print magazine, we feature essays, investigations, photojournalism, and much more by world-class journalists who are going everywhere from the ayahuasca tourism industry in Peru to laboratories at leading universities. We're supporting people like you on their journey with psychedelics, and we're covering this movement as it unfolds. This is all made possible by our members who, in exchange for their support, get direct access to psychedelic experts to help them on their journeys of healing and growth, workshops, and a subscription to our beautiful print magazine. Subscribe today at doubleblindmag.com/membership. So talk to me, Ido. Where do these worlds come together? The world of the plants, the world of the traditional ancestral containers that have been held in oftentimes remote areas of the world, and the world of Western medicine. Because more and more we're seeing, there are people who are trying to bridge these worlds. You're not the only one. But there also is a dichotomy in which there are people that are working in Western medicine that have no frame of reference at all for traditional use of plant medicines. And then we have people in traditional plant medicines that are kind of scoffing at the Western medical paradigm and saying, well, we don't want to put these, multidimensional animate beings through a drug development process because it's going to strip them of all of their sort of intention and the way in which they're meant to be used.
I think they come together in multiple places. One is that they are here to help us understand each other on a much deeper level, and that how we're all interconnected. They can help us understand ourselves better, so we can have a more full depth, soulful, loving, healthy life. And they can help us understand how we serve the collective better. So those are three big frameworks, right? We have to kind of break them down. Psychology, as I understand it, is something that happened when psychology got really, really mainstream is that it gets stripped away from the psyche part of psychology. Psyche is a spiritual term, right? It's not about your brain. Psychology is really associated with the brain and emotions right now, as opposed to the totality of a human being, which it is. It's about the totality of the human being, right? Now, there are different streams of psychology, obviously. So each stream focuses on one or the other. That's why I'm very attracted to a mix of relational psychology with Jungian psychology, because if you put them together, they really look at all the aspects of what it means to be human. And I think that shamanism does the same, right? Shamanism is really about helping us. In one way, it's helping us reconnect with the fact that we're part of nature. We're part of the all. We're not separate. We don't live in power over. We are not the masters of, which is something we forgot. We are part of the ecosystem. And how do we work together? Which is also what psychology tries to do, is how do we work together? Why do you have, right? We call it relational issues. What are relational issues? Why is it hard for us to be together? Why is it hard for us to work together? Why is it hard for us to love each other more? Which obviously I'm sure we'll get to when we talk about the collective later, but right, that's a big problem in our world right now, and it's very on display. We're having a really hard time working together and being together. Mm-hmm. So on that level, I think those were intersects. I'm not going to pretend to know that I understand it fully, but I think part of what happened in that panel is that there is this idea still that it's either one or the other, right? That shamanism had all the answers and psychology is just stripping away or trying to appropriate these practices, while the more medicalized part of psychology, psychiatry, the medicine that are trying to get into psychedelics, we're like, well, we don't need all that. All that spiritual stuff is not really relevant, or it's not really applicable. We're not trying to do that. And it's missing. And for me, my attitude has always been into co-creation and collaboration. Why is it one over other? That's just perpetuating power, as opposed to how can we learn together, right? So there's this idea of, right, this north meets south, right? The eagle and the condor. Again, I'm not going to say that I fully understand it, right? But the idea is that the north, the more westernized North American parts, are going to collaborate with the south, the more shamanic, the more indigenous. And together, something new will come. And it has to start with learning together. But that learning together also has to start with appreciating differences, honoring what you bring to the table that I don't have, and how can I learn from you, and how can you learn from me? As opposed to, we are the only one that know how to do this, or you can do this, or, right? I think that's part of what came up in that panel, which is about gatekeeping. And gatekeeping comes from, I think, in part from fear because of things that happened in the past, where indigenous cultures were being stripped away in very brutal, in violent manner. So it comes from this fear of repetition of what was. But it also comes from this idea, I think, that there is scarcity of like, are we going to be relevant? Are we going to be remembered? Are you trying to wipe us out? And my thing is about, no. I want to learn everything that you have to teach me. Because if we bring all of this together, we're actually providing a more wholer service to everybody.
So you might not know the answer to this question, and it's actually a question I've never asked before. It's probably one that a lot of people would consider controversial. But
I already like it.
But we talk about what does shamanism have to give to Western medicine, but what does Western medicine and psychology, if anything, have to give to shamanism? And what is the relationship in some of these indigenous communities, say a Shipibo community or a Hunikuin community that's in the Amazon that's still practicing traditional ways of plant medicines, that maybe does or does not hold space for foreigners that want to come visit and have these experiences too. How are they relating to our modalities of healing and understanding the mind?
Mm-hmm. I don't think that classical shamanism, has the tools to deal with modern neurosis. We live in urban cities with urban problems, with a psyche that has evolved, got trained, and got wooden in a particular way. We don't live in nature. We don't live the same way. So we have particular issues that require particular tending. Right? And it's interesting because I've seen people say the same about that they go down as Western trained people who then go down to Peru or wherever to get trained. And they're like, it's interesting. I see the same neurosis. I see the same issues, but they treat it totally different. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. They can actually benefit. It's not that there isn't clinical psychology in all these other, Central South American countries. So I think there is a way in which psychology can really offer language that we need, that shamanism doesn't have, that's particular to our Western mind, a certain type of emotional attunement that the Westerners need, that shamanic cultures don't necessarily have. And it's not that they're lacking, it's just different. And I think also our spirituality is different, right? A lot of us are disconnected from nature, right? We've been reclaiming our own shamanic attitude towards nature, but we need it to come with our language. We need to understand it through our framework. That's why integration will become even bigger, but it already is, because a lot of it has to do with translation. You go into these communities, into these shamanic practices, you have a particular experience. And a lot of it is actually learning how to translate it into my particular psyche, into my particular culture. Because if not, some of it can get lost.
Yeah, I mean, I went on an interesting sort of personal journey with this as well, because the first time I sat in an ayahuasca ceremony, I was 25 years old. It was in Joshua Tree. Let's just say it was a leaky container. That's the word we use in psychedelics. It wasn't a great experience. I sat with a Westerner who really wasn't making people feel safe and wasn't properly caring for the people who were there. And then I ended up finding someone else who's a Westerner who was keeping people safe, but who I felt like that was kind of all they were doing, right? They were making sure that the buckets were cleaned. They were making sure that a hand was being held if necessary, but it didn't feel like they were really working with the energies in the room, which is something that's hard to explain if you haven't experienced it. But trust me, there are energies in the room that you will feel, regardless of whether you believe in the metaphysical or not, if you sit with ayahuasca. And so I had this narrative, and I think a lot of people do, that the best experience to have ceremonially is going to be with an indigenous person. That was the narrative I had. And so I wanted to go to the Amazon. I wanted to go to the heart of all of this and experience it for myself. And I went to the Temple of the Way of Light, and I sat with 5 Shipibo elder maestras, and they sang their Icaro before me. And it felt like the Icaro were going into my body and doing spiritual surgery. And I learned that for many generations that the people that the maestras and maestros were trying to heal didn't even drink ayahuasca, that the Icaro themselves were considered to be the spiritual technology. And I thought, I don't know what the heck I've been doing over there in the United States, but
it's definitely not this.
So interestingly, I thought that was it. I thought, okay, I've figured it out. I have to sit with indigenous people. And then several years later, I was invited to sit again with Westerners. But they were not Westerners who had drank ayahuasca, said my life has changed, and decided to start serving ayahuasca. They were Westerners who had really been granted permission by indigenous elders to bring this wisdom back to their land with them. And when I tell you that these people, I mean, they sound like Shipibo maestros and maestras in the dark, the way they sing these Ikaro, because they have sat with families in the jungle for years and years and years. But then in the morning, when the sun rose, were able to ask me about my experience and use Western frameworks to help me process what had happened. I couldn't have a conversation with the maestras. Some of the elder maestras didn't even speak Spanish or English.
Yep.
So that was a real aha moment for me. Sort of disrupted this hierarchy that I had in my mind that, like, you know, it's always best to sit with an indigenous person, because as a Westerner, maybe there's some value in finding a way to combine modalities so that you can bring the teachings forth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I had a similar experience when I went to do my research. I sat with my community in the States, and then I went down to Peru. And I remember being an hour into the first ritual, a ceremony, and I was like, oh, what came up for me, I was like, I'm not in Texas anymore. This is not, this is a whole other ball game. This is a whole other cosmology. You know, I was sitting there and I was seeing this 2-foot high tarantula battling with the shaman, which he later validated as a vision. And I was like, oh, okay, there's very different energies here. Right. And making that really that full switch. But I love that example, Shelby. I think it's right. If you go, I've heard people who facilitate, also used to facilitate in the temple, who said, yeah, you know, we needed to teach those shamanas and shamans, what's an inner child? We had to teach them these basic psychological archetypes because people didn't quite get the feedback they were getting. And they're like, they had to adjust. And what was interesting for me more is that those shamans was like, oh, it makes sense. It makes sense to use that language. It makes sense for me to insert an inner child because I am working on that Nino part of this person. Right? But they talked about it as spirit. It's like, I'm working on your spirit. But it's like, oh, right. But it's a 3-year-old spirit, not a 20-year-old spirit. And when they said that, then for Westerners, it's like, oh, yeah, you know, when I was 3, I was, you know, something horrible happened to me. So they could start making more connections. It could start being more relatable. And I think that's one of the big pieces is we need to find the ways to make these experiences more relatable for us, because it's the relationship that will determine what we're going to do with this. I've had similar experiences to you. I was very fortunate to have my first experience with a shaman from Peru who's been doing it for 50 years. So I got thrown into that world without any context. And I was like, oh my God, what is this? What is this
going on
thing?
Here? There's a tarantula.
There's it was even before, you know.
The jungle's outside. I'm on drugs.
I felt like I was brought, you know, into the advanced class when I was still a toddler. And I was like, what is, I knew it existed, you know, because I had some, again, I had some spiritual experiences before, but I was like, whoa, I don't know if I signed up for this thing. And then I had to work for many years with that first experience. I still sometimes think about it and continuously pick elements of like, oh, you know, my whole personality melted and I couldn't grab a hold of anything. What is that about? And then I see it happening to me. I'm like, oh, I'm grasping. Remember that experience you had where you were grasping? And then he took you to this place where you had nothing more to hold on to and you were fine. Remember that? Or, you know, I remember walking towards, they would sing to us in small groups. So you would go up to him and he would sing to you. And I remember walking there literally like a toddler. I was walking with my bucket, like hugging it, so terrified. But when I stood up, I was straight as an arrow. I was clean. And I remember being like, what did he just do to me? Like, how is it possible that I went like a terrified toddler and I'm now 5 minutes later, I feel as cleansed, clear, strong as I've ever felt. What is that? What was happening, right? So there's a lot that has to do with the language. And I appreciate that you bring it in, because that also something that we agreed on in that panel, which is, if there is something we all agreed on, is it takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of training. It takes training from people. It takes a lot of devotion, right? The person you sat with probably spent so much time with those families in the jungle, in challenging conditions, studying the plants, being with the plants, getting disintegrated over and over again, working through their own stuff, learning the songs through the plants from their teachers. So they become the practice. They're not practicing, they become the practice. It becomes part of their life. It's how they live now. And those are the people, right, that are helping us bridge the North and the South. And they're not only doing that for us geographically, they're doing it for us psychologically and spiritually, right? Like you said, you had an experience, but someone can do it and ask you, like, how do you feel? How was that for you? How did you work with that, right? They use the words trauma, inner child, your grief, your pain, your body pain, right? It's things that you can then grab onto and be like, oh, this person understands me.
Although the types of questions that they ask are so different as well, depending upon their psychological framework. I'm talking about a Western practitioner. One of the words you've used a few times is you've talked about relationship or relation, which is not something we can take for granted. I mean, the cognitive behavioral therapy paradigm, which is still kind of considered the gold standard in therapy, is so much about the individual and the quantifying of the individual's symptoms, right? Like most therapists, CPT, you come in, they give you a survey. How well did you sleep on a scale of 1 to 10? What's your sex drive like on a scale of 1 to 10? And, sometimes those conversations lead in the direction of your relationships, your family, your upbringing, but it's all from this orientation of the individual getting better from a diagnosis, right? So how do we step out of that? What's the importance of stepping out of that?
One of my first mentors told me, Ido, you need to think of diagnosis like you would think about archetypes. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, think about them as just a word that describes characteristics. They're not fixed. They're not unchangeable. They're not significant. It doesn't mean that this person is flawed or damaged in a particular way. And I was like, wait, I don't know what exactly. And I was like, wait, she's right. Because it's not that different than saying, when I tell you, hey, Shelby, this food is really delicious. You know what delicious means. You know that it will taste good. It probably feel good in your body afterwards. You see how excited I am about it. Right, it
probably has cheese on it.
Probably has cheese on it, great. But good quality cheese on it, right?
Only good
quality. Because I wouldn't eat like that. Right? So it opens up. It's a word that opens something up. But I agree. And we still have a lot of work to do to repair the damage that was done by the psychiatric community when we started living through the DSM, right? And when people are, well, if you're borderline, you're borderline. That's it. You're stuck. And that means you can't have relationships and you're probably really emotionally dysregulated or whatever, all the characteristics. And a lot of us still think that way. And I think this is where plant psychedelics are great, because they show us that you can have chronic depression and have a session with Shelby, and lo and behold, you've had 6 hours of not being depressed. What does that mean? What does that mean to you who have built such a strong relationship with a depressed identity, with a depressed condition, to have a break, to have a window when you can feel something else, right? And then these psychedelics and plants are teaching us to rewire our relationship with diagnosis. And part of our challenge as a community will be to continuously invest our energy and funds in research and theories and practices that can help us to continue to get out of it. CBT is very popular because the world of psychology is really into evidence-based modalities. I can quantify it. It shows me that it works. It's good for insurance companies. It's good for funding. We keep doing it. And here we are trying to infiltrate the system, saying, hey, there is a whole psychospiritual world where you can get possessed by entities and there's energies in the room. And, you get messages from all kinds of dimensions of, it's like, wait, what are you, that doesn't fit, right? With our generalized, I would say even capitalistic patriarchal view of medicine. So we have, right, this world that we are representing is building its way into being valid medicine. Being medicine that people, not only you and I, that everyone can connect to in some way or form. I'm curious, one of the reasons I love double bind, and I have a question for you, Shelby, is...
That's not how this works. I'm just kidding. What is it?
One of the reasons I love double bind is because you attract people from all walks of life. And one of the reasons I love doing the integration circles is because we get access to people who are not from, the psychedelic bubbles in either East or Western coasts or all these places in Oregon or even in Europe, right? All these bubbles. And it's beautiful to see people doing what they're doing, and it still feels that there is a way in which we haven't created the language, we haven't created enough bridges to invite them in and be like, hey, look at all this wealth of information, this wealth of practices. So I'm curious for you, how do you think, Shelby, that we're going to create those bridges to help people get out of the regular model of medicine and to show them that psychedelics is really open to everybody?
Well, I think it's already starting to happen. I think there's a lot of different ways that people can fall into these questions. I think one way, unfortunately, is oftentimes deep suffering and a feeling like a person has been failed by the currently available options. In my reporting, I also reported on cannabis. I also reported on mental health more broadly for a long time before I was just writing about psychedelics. And a very common story is I had such and such illness or such and such diagnosis, and I spent thousands of dollars, and I went to all these specialists, and no one could help me. And finally, I decided to try cannabis or mushrooms or whatever, and it made a difference, and it opened me up to questioning what I had been told by the quote unquote medical institution more broadly. From there, I got interested in yoga. I got interested in meditation. I got interested in acupuncture. I got interested in herbs. I also think, obviously, people that are considered authorities in our culture speaking on behalf of psychedelics gets people who are typically afraid of going off of the traditional path more open. So Michael Pollan's book, Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, just this sort of
the Netflix
prominent
show
journalists,
came from his
prominent
book.
journalists, politicians, celebrities, etc., coming out about these things. And then there's the relationships, which is what you were sort of referencing before, which is you have someone that you really love who has had a transformative experience. You can't go to someone that you love and say, my life was changed by mushrooms and you should do them too. That usually doesn't work. But what does work is the person sees your transformation and then they start to get curious.
I love that.
Or they just find a double-blind video on YouTube.
Of course. That's how that's how everybody joins the community.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about what might be missing from this traditional approach of you get a diagnosis, we want to quantify it, we talk about it. Hopefully, you see some marginal improvement over time. You made the choice to combine some other modalities and frameworks in your work, most notably, probably somatics. You take a somatic approach. You also talk about a lot about Jungian psychology and the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these are words that we are hearing get thrown around a lot, more and more and more. Somatics in psychology,
Mm-hmm.
and also the shadow and this idea of going inward and the unconscious and what lives in the unconscious, especially when someone starts thinking about tripping, right? There's like a lot of fear that can come up around, oh, I don't know what lives deep within me, like what's going to come to the surface. So talk to me a little bit about why you felt drawn to these particular frameworks and just demystify them a little bit for people. I know we're not going to get an entire class on the history of Jung right now, but
it all started in 19. No,
there was this man.
There was a
His
man.
name was Carl.
Well, there was a man named Zygmunt. He started this whole.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. I think what got me into this is that I was very into the idea of embodiment. And embodiment is another word that is a buzzword that gets thrown around. But if you actually go and Google the etymology of embodiment, it means bringing the spirit into the body. So it already is something that is about an integration. It's not just working with your physical body. It's bringing the entirety of who you are as a spirit. And for me, that's my emotional self, my psychological self, my spiritual self into my somatic self and how they all collaborate. Because if we're being really honest, for a lot of us throughout our day, those parts of ourselves are mostly at fight. My body feels one way, but my feelings want this, and my mind wants that, and my spirit wants this, or not even aware of what they want. So I've always been into the idea of like, okay, how do we integrate all of this? Because we humans operate in a beautiful way in all those dimensions. And I started searching, and the first one that made, it was like a coming home in a way that was not a purely spiritual lineage was Jung. Because he talked about this. He talked about there is a personal ego, and then there is a collective unconscious, and there is this thing called the self, and there are entities who he calls archetypes, and you have to feel them in your body. And so he talks about the somatic emotional parts of interacting with. And I was like, oh my God, he found the language. The first one before him was Ram Dass, and I think he did a wonderful job. And then I found Jung, and I was like, oh my God, he has the whole dictionary. I want to learn that. So that led for me training in the Jung Institute in San Francisco and spending 5 years there and really, really kind of learning and reading and having my own analysis that's still ongoing for 12 years to really feel in my body all the things I was reading. For me, depth psychology and transpersonal psychology, which Jung is one of its founders, they are really good for psychedelics and entheogens because they really do bridge spirit and matter, the psychological with the spiritual, the self with the collective, right? Like you said, it's not just about me. One of my favorite ideas from Jung, he says, if your individuation is only about you, it's not actually working. It has to come with you understanding more your connection to everything and how you're supposed to serve the collective, which is a very shamanic idea for me. It's like, yeah, it's how do you remember that you are part of this beautiful organism that we call the nature or the world, and that you are part of a collective that it's also your job to serve. It's not just about you. And also the collective is here to support you. So that's one way. Jung talks a lot about this idea of possession, which is very shamanic, right? In shamanism, you get possessed by spirits there's malevolent spirits, there is good spirits, there is animal spirits. You can get possessed. You can get possessed, right? Illness in some form, it's a possession. It's stuck energy, right? Or an entity that's in you and causing you harm or something. For Jung, it's the same thing. We get possessed by our inner child. We get possessed by a archetype that's outside of us, which then dictates how we think, how we feel, how we behave. So I started seeing these parallels, that they're talking in a similar language, and for Jung believed, the collective unconscious is how you connect with your ancestors. That the idea that there are gods and goddesses, that we can connect with them. He has a whole book about UFOs. I mean, we're talking 50, 60 years ago, where UFOs were not a common thing to talk about, or you were looked at like you're very weird if you talk very, very weird.
I mean, now you're looked at like you're very weird, not very, very,
very,
weird.
very, exactly. Very, very, very. Right. So he tried to show over and over again how deep and vast the human experience is. And my experience and the people I've worked with throughout the last more than decade is they go into this experience and they see how vast and deep being a human is actually. So we need those bridges. We need those the language bridges. I think Jung also really works well with somatics, because for him, everything had to be felt. You had to feel it in your body. You had to sense it in your body. That would be a more accurate way to say it. And you have to feel it in your emotional world. If not, it's just a very partial process that's mostly stuck in some intellectual level. Right? And we talk a lot about that when we talk about integration. How do you take this profound experience that you had and slowly bring it into your body? Bring it into your feeling level. I felt the grace of God. Great. How do you work with it so you can feel it every day in your heart? Or my body was doing this odd movement. Great. How do we come back to that odd movement and work with it? A very common one is people seeing ties between their trauma and chronic pain or chronic symptoms. And all of a sudden they have this realization. They're like, oh, I think the reason I'm thinking about something of recent. I work with someone who has pretty persistent Crohn's. And they went into psychedelic experience, and like many other Crohn suffering people that I've talked to and that I've heard about, they're like, oh my God, I realized my Crohn is because as a child, I was terrified in my family so much. And I would keep things inside because I was so scared. And they literally put their hands on their belly. And they would come and they came out and like, I think my Crohn is tied to a lot of terror that I haven't digested. And that's one of the beautiful ways in which, right? So we moved from physical symptoms to implicit memory that is somehow lodged in my body, to having an understanding of my emotional world, my physical world. And who knows how that's going to open for that person further.
I've heard this narrative in the psychedelic community among some folks that all physiological symptoms are rooted in some kind of deeper, like psychospiritual disconnection or fragmentation. Do you believe that?
Yes and no. I do believe that a lot of it is because of that. I also think that most of us in the last 80 years are raised in culture that eats very unhealthy food, that there's more radiation around us than ever before, there's also the impact of intergenerational trauma that we already know now, through research, that it literally morphs your genetic code. So I don't want to dismiss the fact that sometimes it's really just your body, that certain bodies are born with particular conditions. And it's not because of some unresolved trauma or some kind of horrible thing that created some severing on the level of soul. But have I seen? Oh, absolutely. That absolutely happens. Anything from, I interviewed someone who had cancer, and she, through working with ayahuasca, was extremely clear that it came from living in a very repressed household where she learned to repress her creativity and her sexuality, but it didn't prevent her from going and getting chemo. So she was like, yeah, I need to get this cancer out. So I went and got the medical treatment, but I also went and took care of the emotional, spiritual part of it, which was my early childhood trauma and how it impacted those authentic parts of me.
Right. Yeah. Especially, I mean, yeah, we've heard so many stories in our reporting as well of people who have plant medicine experiences, and then those experiences end up having an impact, a positive impact on how they feel in their bodies, chronic pain, migraines, all kinds of things. But when it comes to cancer in particular, that's something that I try to stay away from because I know it's such a sensitive topic, and it's one that a lot of people could get, understandably so. I mean, I've had people in my family with cancer, sensitive about if you were to imply that, it was somehow just a result of sort of like a psychospiritual imbalance. At the
Absolutely.
same time, from my reporting, like my genuine question would be, can we hold a multiplicity of truths whereby it
Exactly.
could be genetic, it could be environmental, and simultaneously there could be some kind of impact in regards to stress. I mean, we know that stress, there's just rigorous clinical trial data showing the physiological impact that can have. I mean, who knows, what all the various impacts it could have. But I mean, it's hard to believe that it doesn't have a profound, yeah,
Absolutely.
there's not a profound
Absolutely.
relationship between that and a lot of the diagnoses we're seeing and the culture we're living in and how hard it is to just keep your head above water, truthfully, in this paradigm.
Yeah, it is. It's very hard to keep your head above water, especially if you're trying to live as an open, empathetic person. I think it ties to what we talked about before, this idea that we can get a little bit messianic about these things. That there's like, no, if you just work with the plants, your cancer will be gone, which is a minimizing of someone's whole life experience and not necessarily based in reality. I have she passed away. I had a friend who was an ayahuasca practitioner, and she was able to beat cancer once with the plants, and the second time she wasn't able, and she died. And right, you would say, well, how is it from that perspective? She was a committed ayahuasca practitioner, deep spiritual practice. So if I go with that rationalization, she was supposed to be good. But no, her body was supposed to go through something. And she tried, and she eventually even said the smart thing would have been to enjoy the benefit of both worlds, to get both Western support and working with the plants on an emotional, psychological, spiritual level.
Right, right, right.
Right. So again, how can we learn? And if not learn, how can we at least consult each other? Right. So if I'm going to try and heal my cancer through the plants, can I find there are now beautiful doctors who are very, very into the psychospiritual world that's tied to psychedelics and plants? Can I find someone who has that kind of modality to consult with, who is both understanding of what I'm trying to do, but also has one foot in Western medicine? Because Western medicine has a lot to offer too.
And as we're talking about, you know, psychospiritual imbalances that might manifest in the physical, it's also getting me thinking about this concept of the shadow and this
Mm-hmm.
narrative that so many of us have in the psychedelic space that there's like stuff living within us, emotions, memories, thoughts that we don't even know. We're not even aware of. We can't even access when we're just operating from this sort of default mode network day to day, going through your routine place. And that we need the help of the plants or other modalities, not just necessarily the plants, but breath work, meditation, etc., to access those places. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? This idea of there's stuff hiding within you, and
lurking in the shadows.
In order to be whole, you need to somehow reach in there and pull it out.
Yes, you need a very big flashlight and a lot of courage. Yeah, absolutely. Shadow is everything that is out of consciousness, or we have a hard time keeping in consciousness. So that statement works in both directions. It's either the parts of us that are more challenging, or aspects of our experience that are more challenging that we want to keep away, or really powerful, beautiful, authentic parts of us that for some reason are exiled, as they say in IFS, out of consciousness. So shadow is all of it. And as long as we don't make those parts of us conscious, the thing about shadow is that it operates in the background. So if I don't make it conscious, it will come at me as a symptom or a repetitive behavioral pattern or a repetitive self-harming pattern. Self-harming doesn't mean literally I have to like be cutting myself or something. It means that every time I meet a nice person who wants to date me, I find a way to somehow sabotage it. Or every time I'm about to... Never done that. Me too. I don't know. I've read about it in books. This is where it's funny because I'm like, if you want a psychedelic, be in a relationship. That will humble you on a daily basis. And a relationship doesn't only mean romantic. We have really good friendships. Any place that really is striving for honesty and intimacy. So that's the beginning of what shadow is. And as opposed to popular belief in the psychedelic world, no amount of ayahuasca or MDMA or LSD is going to make your shadow disappear. And I know people who hear this will be, there are differing opinions. That is my opinion, both from working and researching and practice. I think a lot of that desire comes from, and I think you named it, from suffering. If I can only get rid of this part of myself, of that pattern, I will have the life I imagine. And that's a valid desire to have. But it's risky to tie it to an unrealistic solution. I'll just go and do a 6 months intensive in the jungle and that's it. I will get rid of my childhood trauma. I'm like, how is that possible when you lived in your body for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, controlled by the impact of that trauma? How is it possible that in 6 months you will erase all of that? That you will rewire all those neurons, all those emotional patterns, all those attachment patterns, all those beliefs and cognitive structures. It's such a for me, it's sad because it's a setup. And I've seen people have incredible experiences and minimize them because they didn't meet that goal. So the idea for me of shadow is, again, it's back to relationship. How do I start building a relationship with the parts of myself that I feel ashamed about, that I feel embarrassed that I have? How do I build a relationship with the fact that maybe sometimes I'm nasty and I'm violent, or I have really mean thoughts? So I go and put them on Twitter, but it's under a pseudonym, so nobody knows it's me. And I go get right. But how do I really start integrating that? And the more I integrate it, it allows me to not act it out. It allows me to actually start working on it. Because maybe behind my jealousy of Shelby's creativity, there is my creativity. And if I could sit with the fact that I am a jealous person, I can then sit and think like, why do I keep, every time Shelby does this, like something creative, I seethe. I like all these nasty, because my creativity is not really expressed. I'm repressing my creativity. And then it starts opening for us this whole exploration. Why is my creativity repressed? Why am I scared of taking crayons and starting to draw things or create my own podcast or whatever that is, right? So shadow allows us access to the parts of ourselves. That's one. Two, shadow also allows us access to see how culture lives inside of us. I used to talk about this with Lauren Taos way back when. And Lauren said something that I really love. She said, if we're being honest, most people are living in a body that's like a war zone. And she's right. And what does she mean by that? The way I understand her is like, how many messages have we internalized about our body shape, our sexuality, our gender, how we're supposed to behave? That is not even from us. That we have learned that we are constantly being infiltrated unconsciously through things we hear, see online, which is so easy right now because we're very much hooked on taking in information. And then we interject it and it merges with our voice. So I think I need to be thinner. And I hear it as my thought, but it's actually not. Right? Deanna and I wrote a piece for Double Bind about this. What if nothing is wrong with me? What if for 1 second I'm like, you know what? Maybe nothing is wrong. Meaning I release myself a little bit from my attachment to the shadowy identity of the stuff I haven't explored. And that's something that you mentioned before, right? And a lot of us go and want an ego death experience in psychedelics to get rid exactly of that. Well, if I can obliterate this ego, meaning the part of me that is holding all this unmetabolic, that is feeling all this pain, that is perpetually criticizing me, if I can get rid of it, oh my God, life is going to be fabulous. I'm going to be, surfing on the bliss divine train for the eternity. Now, I myself do not believe in ego death. What I like more is ego disintegration. I am all for disidentifying with this version of me that I've got built for me and I built, and getting some space and seeing, oh, wow, look, I have some oxygen. And all of a sudden I can see my partner differently. And I can see my life differently. And I have hope. And I feel my creative side. And I see that I can become and be and connect in a much different way. But eventually, it's through the ego, which is just our synthesizer, that all those new ideas are going to have to come filtering through into our body and to my behavior. Right? So as far as ego work for myself, that's another big something that I would like to keep talking about, as opposed to get to people to stop trying to kill themselves psychologically or spiritually, and actually see, right? We have so many spiritual traditions that already have the tools to help us disidentify, continuously disidentify, continuously search, come back deeper. So shadow work really allows us that opening. And then there is a lot of what we experience on psychedelics and plants, as I see it, is more shadow encounter. We get in touch with things. Now, if you have a really good guide, shamanic or otherwise, they can help you work with it in the moment. So you start seeing how, right? So the trauma comes up, and then you can start working with it. That's where dosage is also important. I can start feeling like, oh, I feel the pain of my inner child, but now I can give it love and compassion because that's what that child actually wants. Usually I criticize that child. I'm like, ugh, here I am doing that same pattern again. What the hell is wrong with me? And now I can give it some love. And look what happens when I give it some love. Poof, something happens. Right? So it gives us the opportunity to move from encounter to shadow work. Shadow work is, for me, 90% happens in integration. You bring the insights, you bring the encounters, and now through the relationship building, through the engagement, we start working. I start making deeper understanding why. I'll take from someone that I worked with recently who they lived with this idea that there is something horribly wrong with them because they grew up with a version of God that's very punishing. And then they went and had I believe it was a psilocybin experience. And they met a benevolent God who said, there's nothing wrong with you. You are beautiful. And started describing in vibrant detail how they're beautiful. And this person came out and they're like, I don't know what to do with that. I've never experienced such a God. So that's the shadow. And now through integration, we're working with what does it take to start internalizing the messages that you're also a beautiful person. You're not just damaged because you were traumatized. That you have so much to offer people. That you're funny. That was one of the things that was shown to her. You're funny. Right? So that's the next level of shadow work. Oh, there's one more thing.
Okay.
One more thing. Because I can talk a lot about this. One more. Because it feels very relevant and we referenced it. There is the collective shadow, right? So it's not just about us.
Right.
It's how do I participate and either add or heal the collective shadow. We are right now living inside a very tumultuous collective time, right? There's a Russia-Ukraine war. There is Israel-Palestine, which is leaking into conversations around race, around ethnicity, around power, around a lot of isms, racism, all kinds of stuff. That automatically will stir up our own unprocessed shadow. How do I make sure that I'm not contributing to the same systems of oppression and systems of violence by being reactive, by letting my own pain, sadness, empathy, compassion, righteousness, right, take over me, possess me again. So we're back to our conversation, possess me. And then I go and put more fuel in the fire. I'm like, no, I know what's true. And I'm going to go and join this side that knows what's true. And then I'm going to, which as opposed to, and I truly believe that, I just wrote about this. 80% of the time, if I took 3 hours to sit with it and be like, wait, why am I about to go online and write this like horrible, violent message? If I sit with it, I probably will not write that message. I would probably write it differently. Mm-hmm. So it's not that I'm going to lose my voice, but if I sit down and work through the layers of me, I'm like, wait, why? And I've had this since the last 7 months, had to do this over and over again, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, with myself, and be like, I really want to tell this person what I think about them. And I'm like, wait. Before you do that.
You know what I think?
Let me tell you who you are. Exactly. Let me tell you who you are and what's right and who's right. And that if you don't think like I do, then obviously you're in the wrong. Uh-huh. And that would be the nice version. Right? But noticing how we're not perpetuating collective shadow.
Right.
Yeah. How do we integrate our personal transformation to collective transformation?
So we like to invite our guests to meditate with us for a couple minutes before we wrap up.
Oh, beautiful.
Is that something that
I'm very much here for it. Yes, please.
Okay, great.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sky Weaver, resident facilitator at Double Blind, and I invite you into a little bit of breath work here today. So the breath we're going to use is coming in through the nose and out through the mouth. So we're going to inhale through the nose, a little extra inhale here, and exhale nice and long through the mouth. That's it. Again, inhale through the nose, a little gasp, and exhale through the mouth. Right, and on that exhale, just letting everything out. A couple more times. Inhale through the nose, exhale, Good. One more time. Beautiful. And you can continue doing that as I explain just a little bit about this, that this is a beautiful breath practice that you can do to calm your nervous system. Anytime I'm feeling anxious about anything, in fact, preparing for this video today, I did my breath work. So inhaling in, one more time, and exhale. Soften that jaw and that tongue. One more. Nice. And just allowing the breath to return back to normal. Wiggling the body a little bit. I'm a big fan of wiggling. And welcome back. We'll see you soon.
You're not driving or doing something else that requires your hands, I invite you to stretch, because that's what I'm doing. If you're watching this on YouTube, then you know that. If you're just listening, you don't, but my hands are side to side. I'm pulling them back. There is so much happening in psychedelics right now, at the risk of stating the obvious. So I just want to invite you to share anything else you'd like to. What's alive for you as you just think about all these people that are getting interested in this.
One, you're not alone. Two, seek community. Three, seek information. There is, first of all, double blind is a wonderful place to start. There is a lot of really, really good, skilled, committed organizations and people that are out there trying to really do good. And as far as providing the right knowledge to start this path, to know what you're entering into. Don't be afraid to seek help. Help is not a bad word. Go slow, but go deep. I prefer to do less, but go deeper than do more and not give myself the time to really rest and digest. Right? Our nervous system, our psychospiritual nervous system is very similar to our somatic nervous system. We need rest in order to digest. So that's what comes to mind.
Do you want to share for folks where they can find you, follow you, etc.?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Ido Cohen and the Integration Circle as well. And you can find us by being a member of Double Blind and coming to our integration circles that Deanna and myself do. And I think that's good for now.
Thank you so much for joining you, and
thank you, Shelby,
for your work.
Thank
you for walking the path.
Thank you.
I love talking to Ido. I love who he is. I love how he holds space. I love the poetry with which he speaks about this moment in psychedelics and what it means to get into all the sticky, icky of walking this path yourself. You can't fully understand the magic of Ido, I don't think, without actually participating in some of these integration sessions, containers, circles that he holds, because the work itself, like he was saying, it's somatic. It's beyond conversation. It's about really tuning in with what's alive for you and your body. And the way that he guides people to do that, along with Deanna Rogers, is just incredible. We have seen so many people have absolutely transformative experiences in the integration circles that they hold for double blind and also outside of double blind. So really encourage you to check out his work and consider attending an integration circle if you're looking for community, if you're looking to process your psychedelic experiences with other people. I want to say thank you so much to everybody for listening. We really appreciate your support. Double Blind is a labor of love. And if you want to read some of our incredible journalism on the fascinating world of psychedelics or get your tripping questions answered, we have a lot of free articles on our website, doubleblindmag.com. We work with absolutely amazing journalists and photographers who travel all around the world interviewing indigenous stewards of plant medicines, researchers, therapists, politicians, you name it. And it's all made possible with the support of our membership, which comes with a subscription to our beautiful print magazine, access to a private community of psychedelic lovers, workshops with psychedelic experts, and discounts to our classes where we teach you how to grow shrooms and microdose and do so many other fun things. So we hope you'll consider subscribing and supporting our work at doubleblindmag.com/membership, or just check out that link in the show notes. If you have thoughts about what we talked about today, you have suggestions about who should come on in the future, there are so many ways to hit us up. You can email us at magichour@doubleblindmag.com or visit doubleblindmag.com/magichour. You can find us on all the social platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, at Double Blind Mag. I also want to give a shout out to the amazing people at Human Content who are producing this podcast and helping make it possible. They do a lot of great podcasts other than this one, so if you're into podcasts, you can check them out on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods. Thank you to all of the listeners who have been leaving amazing feedback and awesome reviews. It really helps us when you do that. So if you like this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe and comment on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube. The full episodes are up every week on YouTube at Double Blind. I'm your host, Shelby Hartman. Special thanks again to our guest, Ido Cohen. Our executive producers are Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, Shanti Brooke, and Alex Field from the Double Blind team, who also edits the show. Our engineer is Jason Portizo. Our music is by the lovely women of the band Oma. To learn about our Double Blind Magic Hour program disclaimer and ethics policy and submission verification and licensing terms, you can go to doubleblindmag.com/magichour. Double Blind Magic Hour is a Human Content and Double Blind production. Now let's take you out on Shawawa Huni Para by Tsana Inuba Ke. He is the nephew of Chief Tue, a leader of a Huni Queen community in São Vicente, Brazil. And there's dozens of Huni Queen communities across the Peruvian and Brazilian Amazon, and they remain important stewards of their territories and the plant medicines that live within them. This is a beautiful album. I encourage you to check it out on Spotify and to support him. Thanks for watching. And if you're thinking, gosh, I really need more Double Blind Magic Hour in my life, well, you can start listening now by clicking on that playlist button right over there. New episodes are out every Monday, so please subscribe and join us each week on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.